Hey everyone. I never know, like, hi, all 12 of you. I'm here with my friend Jessica Nurick. Jessica, I'm president of your fan club. I know that Jessica Yellen is kind of claiming that. And I was like, hey, I found Jessica before Jessica Yellen. Am I
You
right?
did. You found me early.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I found you early. I'm an
I
early
mean,
advocate of
n-
yours.
not as early as I found you, but that's par for the course, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I've been doing it for a while. Hi,
Yeah.
everyone. Hi, Bill, Cousins, and Kate Brandt, and anyone else on this. You guys, when I did the show yesterday and we did a lot of interviews, unfortunately, Jessica Nurick couldn't join us. She wasn't available, and we felt like it was really important to talk about SNAP and what's happening with the SNAP program and so many people who rely on it. And I know Jessica and I were just laughing because I've been a big fan of hers for quite some time because I think she does such a great job debunking some of the BS, quite frankly, that is out there. She's got a PhD in public health and I guess
Nutrition science.
nutrition science
Yeah.
and so she's the perfect person to talk about SNAP. And let me just give you guys a quick intro. We're on day 30, which is hard to believe, but the government shut down, no end in sight. Tens of millions of people are at risk of losing federal food and nutrition benefits, including nearly 42 million people who rely on SNAP, which stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And this would be the first time in U.S. history that a federal administration has stopped food assistance during a government shutdown. And of course, this is happening just a few weeks before Thanksgiving. So, Dr. Nurick, Jessica Nurick, is, as we mentioned, a registered dietitian with a PhD in nutrition science, not in public health, but kind of in that
Yeah.
whole rubric, who writes about nutrition science and public health and policies, politics, and misinformation. So I just thought we would do a quick primer, if you will, on SNAP and sort of
Mhm.
on public health nutrition. So can you explain, Jessica, what public health nutrition actually is for people who don't know?
Yeah. So public health nutrition we have certain programs in the country that essentially are created in order to help with public health, and so they're core public health infrastructure, and they help low income people have access to the food that they need to meet their nutrient and energy needs. So SNAP is our biggest one. It covers, as you mentioned, 42 million people, 1 in 8 Americans, 1 in 5 children, and it helps them have access to food. And we call them public health nutrition programs because we know that their utilization leads to health outcomes, like positive health outcomes, and so that's why they're so important and why they're used so frequently in this country.
And in addition to SNAP, as you said, they're all part of this government assistance food and nutrition program. There's also something called WIC. And I remember
Yeah.
one of my first interviews on the Today Show back in the day involved WIC. And I think it was funding cuts to WIC. Can you explain what that is and how it's different than SNAP?
Yeah, WIC is Women, Infant, and Children. So it's the supplemental nutrition program specifically for women, infants, and children, and children up to age 5. So when they're little, and it's a much smaller program than SNAP. So like we mentioned, SNAP covers 42 million people. WIC covers about like 7 to 8 million people. So a much smaller program, and or actually, that's not true. It covers more like 2 million people, I think. I think it's like 7 to 8 billion dollars is what it is instead of $100 billion for SNAP. So that's the difference in terms of like the
The
actual
reach.
cost.
Yeah. But also,
Cost and reach.
is that mostly for like formula, infant formula and things for people and their newborns?
So it is formula. It's also baby food. It's also fruits and vegetables. So actually, under the Biden administration, there was a huge increase in the amounts of fruits and vegetables that you could get on WIC. And so the goal is it's really like very supplemental, very specific to a particular demographic, and it's intended to help to increase the nutrient density of the diet of the mom and also the children. So yes, access to formula when they're infants, but also access to food for the children and the moms and the breastfeeding women.
Is WIC being cut as well, Jessica, because of the government shutdown?
Yeah, so I actually just interviewed somebody yesterday about WIC. She's the leading researcher at PHFE WIC in California, and so she was explaining to me that it's funded a completely different way, by a different mechanism. And so at this time, it for the month of October, it actually was funded through emergency funds, and that's the expectation is that it will continue to be funded through emergency funds. Again, it's funded through a different mechanism. So we're not as concerned about the funding with WIC as we are with SNAP. And I would encourage anybody who is getting WIC or qualifies for WIC to continue to get your WIC benefits and continue to use them.
You talk about this emergency kind of fund, and I think I heard the Attorney General of North Carolina talk about the fact that there is an emergency fund that would pay for this food assistance, but it's not being used. Why not?
Yeah, so you're talking about SNAP now. So for
Yes, I'm
SNAP,
going back to SNAP.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, so SNAP, and so just so everybody's clear, like SNAP costs about $8 to $9 billion a month because it's about $100 billion over the year, and so those payments were everyone got their SNAP benefits in the month of October. What the administration is saying is that they will not release the benefits in the month of November. And just so we know, everyone knows this has never happened before. We have never not released SNAP benefits during a government shutdown. The thing is that there is a contingency fund, as you mentioned, that the USDA has. It's already appropriated by Congress. They have it at their disposal. They can use it. They're saying that they will not use it, and they're using kind of an excuse to say that it's not you can't actually use it during a shutdown because it's for emergencies, not just to like cover gaps during a shutdown. But that completely counteracts their plan that they had actually written, which they published like a few weeks ago in September, about what their contingency plan would be if there was a government shutdown, which in it they included a SNAP contingency fund, and they said that that contingency fund could be used to cover SNAP benefits. They took that down from their website and then issued this whole thing where they're not going to release them, and so it's very disingenuous to say that. I actually just saw, Katie, because I was looking this up right before we got on, and I think just a few hours ago there was reporting that there's like 25 states that are suing the USDA right now, led by
Right.
Democratic
And one is
attorneys
that
general.
I think that one of those states is North Carolina because I was
Okay.
watching a video from the North Carolina AG, and you're right, he was saying that.
Yeah, so they're suing the USDA, and a judge is going to rule on if they have to release the contingency funds or not. I am not a legal scholar, so I don't know how that works. If it's just the 25 states who are suing who would actually get those funds, or if it would be everyone. But so there's some hope there, I suppose, that they would release them. But I don't know. We're on Thursday, and these funds run out tomorrow, and so I don't know if it would happen on time. It might be delayed if it does happen.
And I wonder if the USDA, there's all sorts of reports already surfacing now, Jessica, and I can read some of them in a second. But I wonder if the USDA, seeing reports of all this suffering and all these families who are not being able to access food, if they might be pressured in releasing those funds.
I mean, I don't understand how they couldn't be. I don't understand how they couldn't be feeling pressure. If you just unless you're just not engaging with what's happening. I mean, we are already seeing food pantries kind of overworked. We are seeing a surge of like donations, but a lot of people think like food pantries and food banks are going to be able to make up for this, and they're just not. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have anywhere near the resources to be able to make up the meals that are going to be lost through SNAP benefits.
In
And
fact, I
so,
just
yeah,
want to interrupt real quick to read you a quote from a CEO of something called the Manna Food Bank in Asheville, North Carolina. The head of the food bank said uh, that it's had to use its cash reserves to purchase additional food and increase staffing on its helpline. But she said, I'll be honest, we can't replace the power of the United States government. For every one meal that is provided through a food bank, SNAP provides nine.
yeah, yeah. I
The,
mean, they just can't make up for it. Um, and so we can talk a little bit too about like what that looks like. What's gonna what's gonna happen on November 1st when all of these people don't get their SNAP benefits. And so, what SNAP is there for is in order to qualify for SNAP, you need to meet requirements. And one of those requirements, generally, this is different by state, but for the most part, it's 130% of the poverty line. And the reason it's 130% of the poverty line is because there's evidence to show that people under that are at a much higher risk of food insecurity. And food insecurity is essentially when you don't have the nutrients, you don't have the access to the nutrition that you need to meet your energy and nutrient needs to kind of live an active, healthy life. And what will happen is when they don't have access to these funds, which help them. I mean, SNAP directly decreases food insecurity by up to 30% in some populations, and so that's the most important part of SNAP is that we're reducing food insecurity, which on the back end helps improve health outcomes. And so if you're kind of restricting that and not allowing people to have access to these benefits, and the benefits we're talking about are modest. They're, on average like $212-ish per month per person. That's the average SNAP benefit, $7 a day. But it helps people kind of fill that gap and be able to have access to groceries.
You know what's upsetting, and I know you kind of talked about this. There are a lot of misconceptions out there about SNAP
Yeah.
and a lot of falsehoods that are being perpetuated by influencers and also by critics who are really dragging the people who are relying on these SNAP benefits. And I wondered, you kind of started at the beginning telling us about the people who receive these benefits, but can you give us more of a reality check and how you're refuting some of these people who are delivering very false information?
Yeah, I think that there's an intentional kind of like propagandistic narrative out there about SNAP because um there's an administration right now who really wants to cut SNAP, and in fact, just did cut almost $200 billion from SNAP in the last budget bill in July. And so, the idea is that this program is filled with waste, fraud, and abuse, and people should be working
And
and
people are taking advantage of it and they're
advantage.
buying crap with their SNAP benefits and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and the reality is that almost half of people who use SNAP are children. 80% of benefits go to households that either have children, have a disabled person, or have elderly people in the household, and that's really how we look at SNAP is by household. And the vast majority of people who do not have one of those conditions are working. And what we see is that a lot of people who are working full time or working multiple jobs, they still utilize SNAP resources because their pay is so low. We also see, I mean, our military, uh, hundreds of thousands of our military families utilize SNAP benefits. Millions of our veterans utilize SNAP benefits. So I think there's this kind of idea that it's just people mooching off the system, and that's just not the reality. When we actually look at data and look at who's actually using SNAP, it's people who need SNAP. I mean, I hear from people all the time because I talk about this program so often, and people will just DM me their stories about how, they were in medical school and they used SNAP to get through a few months when they didn't have income coming in, or even a couple years when they didn't have income coming in. And now they're, medical doctors paying back to the system. There's people who used it they lose their jobs and they're out of work. And that's the majority of these people who aren't working. They're looking for work. So they're in between jobs looking for work. They have two kids and they utilize SNAP benefits to kind of make ends meet for those few months. And then they get their job and then they get off of SNAP benefits. And we see that happen with people who are kind of in the workforce time of their life. That's exactly how they're using SNAP benefits.
Well, we've seen a lot of federal workers having to go to food banks, right? Who have been
Exactly.
uh, temporarily or even permanently laid off from the government. Talk about the impact of what it will mean for so many of these families, for so many of these kids, for so many of these veterans and elderly people who are not able to take advantage. As we mentioned, if you all are just joining us, we were talking about the fact that food pantries are no match for the SNAP program and the federal government. One person who runs a food bank that I just mentioned, which was in Asheville, North Carolina, said for every one meal that is provided through a food bank, SNAP provides 9. So obviously they cannot take up the slack. So what are these families going to do, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that SNAP directly reduces food insecurity. That's its main purpose. It also gets people, it's one of our best like anti-poverty programs that we have in the country. It helps lift people out of poverty. But what we'll see if people don't have access to their SNAP benefits is we'll see food insecurity rise. I mean, estimates, studies have looked at this, and if the SNAP program goes away, we'll see food insecurity more than double. And if food insecurity doubles, we will see worse health outcomes, right? We'll see health costs rise down the road. We'll see hunger rise. Children, I mean, we have 16 million children who rely on SNAP. Like I said, 1 in 5 children. Many families are already using somewhere like 30 to 40% of their budget on food. And if you take away kind of a big chunk of what they use each month on their food, they're going to have to make choices, right? Are they going to buy their food? Are they going to pay their rent? Are they going to pay their utility bills? And so you're going to see a ton of downstream consequences of this as well. And we haven't even talked, Katie, about, there's health consequences here, but there's also economic consequences because SNAP, for all of the rhetoric out there, is an incredibly economically efficient program. Every dollar that goes into SNAP generates $1.50 to $1.80 in local economic activity because if you're getting SNAP benefits, you're spending them every single month. And so if you take that away, that's also going to hurt local economies because we're looking that's $100 billion that is put into these local stores, grocery stores
Small retail
locally, but
stores,
also
yeah.
small retail, also bigger stores, but just in general, $100 billion going into the economy that just won't be there anymore. So that's, all of those things. Obviously, I care more about the health consequences than the economic consequences, but you're going to see both.
Right, right. And you talk about sort of the social determinants of health, which is something people like you, I know, refer to in terms of overall health and, all these factors that contribute to declining health. And for these kids, even learning at school, right? For the going hungry and not having enough nutrition to actually learn. And you're right, all these downstream economic consequences. So I guess the question is, and by the way, if anyone has questions for Jessica, please put them in the chat. So I said to my colleagues, we're going to go volunteer at a food bank, and I'm a big supporter of City Harvest here in New York. But other than helping food banks, um, what else can be done in your view?
Yeah, I think importantly about food banks, I think right now they really could use cash too, not just like food.
Volunteering, yeah, and food, yeah.
Volunteering and cash. So if you find just find your local food bank, you can do that. Feeding America is a great resource. You can go to Feeding America. I think it's .com, but I don't know. Just
Yeah,
Google Feeding America.
we'll find it, yeah.
Yeah. And then, and they have a service where you can just go put in your zip code and you can find your local food bank. Feeding America itself is a great organization to donate to. If you're looking to donate, they have a lot of they have the whole infrastructure there that helps work with local food banks. And then I think just helping people to understand the importance of these programs within your own life as well. So when you're talking to your friends and your family, because I'm seeing so many videos right now of people being like, it doesn't matter if SNAP benefits don't go out in November. This is a terrible program anyway. And people just don't know the impact of this program and what that is going to do and the types of people that are on this program. And so I think talking to people too and just helping people to understand can be really important. Those are kind of the biggest areas right now. There are a lot of local chapters right now, like people that, like next door. I've heard from a lot of people. There's people who are like adopting families or being grocery buddies. So I think
Oh,
like in
that's
your
a nice
local area.
idea.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that could be a good way to go about it too. So kind of look on Nextdoor, look on if you have a neighborhood Facebook page or something like that, people who are in need of support.
That's a great idea. And just before we go, I mean, I know RFK Jr. keeps you very busy. I'm so astounded by his ignorance and the stupid things he says on an almost daily basis. I'm curious if you've seen any fallout from some of the stuff. I don't know whether you'd be in a position to, actually see this, but claims about Tylenol and pregnancy, or he talked about something the other day about a baby being in a mother's placenta. I might have seen it on your feed. Did you
Yeah.
see that?
Yeah, I saw it.
What was he saying? What was he saying?
I think that was just at a press conference, and he was just talking about a subject he didn't understand and said that there were babies in placentas, which is clearly not the case. Those of us who have had babies know that the baby's not inside the placenta. Um, but yeah, so with the Tylenol thing, I mean, I he just came out and said, that Tylenol does not cause autism. I've had a bunch of people send that to me, and
Oh, he
some people
did? I missed that. When was that?
I maybe today, because I got a lot of I haven't seen it myself, but I got a lot of messages about it, and someone was like, "Why does he keep doing this?" And, like, coming out and saying something and then going back on what he said, and, I mean, of course, the reason for this was that he promised a cause of autism by September, and Trump wanted him to have a big press conference to talk about it, and so they had to come up with some sort of cause of autism, and so, they took something that had some correlational data and not even strong correlational data, no causal data, and then just suggested a causation, and it was I mean, that's really harmful because here's the thing, Tylenol is the only pain medication, fever reducer that is okay to consume in pregnancy. The other ones are even worse. They actually have data that show that they're not safe. And so when you tell somebody they can't take Tylenol like our president did in a tweet or a truth or whatever you call them, and says, he says pregnant women don't take Tylenol. Somebody with a fever now, which is actually harmful in
Right,
pregnancy and
that
can
actually
cause
has been linked as a possible cause of autism.
has does have yes, is correlated to autism, does cause birth defects, can cause a lot of issues in pregnancy. If you're telling them not to take Tylenol, the better choice would be to take Tylenol. So that's why, OBGYNs, everyone that I've ever spoken with, and I've spoken to many, are like, please just listen to us and like talk to your doctor and don't listen to RFK Jr. on that kind of and Trump on health advice.
In fact, it says, I don't know where this is from,
USA
Julia.
Today.
Huh?
USA Today.
USA Today was reporting Health Secretary RFK Jr. said on October 29th that he does not have sufficient evidence to link Tylenol to autism more than a month after the White House discouraged the medicines used by pregnant women and young children. I mean, in closing, how damaging and confusing and honestly irresponsible is it for somebody who is the secretary of HHS to constantly, with the president's support, spread these this misinformation, disinformation, false information about medical and health issues. I feel like the public is already confused enough because of social media. I read a study that said 48% of medical information on TikTok is false or misleading. So people aren't really getting accurate medical information anyway. For
Yeah.
the administration to perpetrate all this fake stuff is just as a public health advocate, and I consider myself in that category too, how damaging is this for us as a society?
I mean, it's really damaging. I was just gonna say before you were asking me, like, the damage has already been done with Tylenol, right? So you've already kind of, like, put that out there, and so a very vulnerable group of people I mean, you've been pregnant, I've been pregnant, like, that's a very vulnerable time in life when you just wanna do what's best for your baby. You just wanna do what's best for yourself, and it's a time when you're easily kind of, like, scared by things like
Yeah,
that.
of course.
And so now we have our HHS secretary and our president saying these things, and a lot of women hear that, and now even people who might be like, "Yeah, it's probably not true," in the back of their mind, they'll think, "Okay, maybe that is true," actually, and just give them more anxiety and fear that's just completely unfounded. And so, I think in public health, we're dealing with this right now, and we're dealing with a situation where, they're saying that no one trusts public health, but then they're actually doing things you shouldn't be trusting, so it's very difficult, and then, the experts will come out and be like, "That's false," and then people will say, "Why are you being so political? Because you're just correcting a scientific falsehood." I mean, RFK Jr. is expected to come out and say, "We should increase our intake of saturated fat," which
Oh, I
goes
saw that on your feed, and it was
Yeah.
like, "What?" And it was that because of the meat and dairy industries got to him?
I mean, So the meat and dairy industries are two of the biggest lobbies that have always been there for the dietary guidelines. They've always, because the recommendation and the nutrition science research says we should decrease our amount of meat consumption and we should decrease our amount of saturated fat consumption, and that's not great for the meat industry or dairy industry. And so it's possible. I mean, I'm speculating, but it seems plausible to me that that would be the case. I also know that he's come out and said that he himself follows a more carnivore-ish diet, and so it's probably a lot of, like, his personal ideology of nutrition, which he's thinking is a good recommendation for the country. Our country doesn't have a problem with eating not enough saturated fat. That's not an issue for us. Like, the recommendation, we actually overconsume saturated fat for the current recommendations. Our problem is we don't eat enough vegetables, we don't eat enough fruits, we don't eat enough beans and fiber, but certainly not saturated fat. So, I mean, that's an example where it's just harmful. It's harmful nutrition medical advice, that's at a population level. To kind of put that out there, is going to make the country less healthy when they're saying they wanna make the country more healthy, so it's tough.
But we follow these Maha influencers, right? And these acolytes of RFK Jr. I know many of them are not experts in any way, shape, or form about things like nutrition and science. But are any of them starting to become increasingly skeptical of him, or are they still pretty much drinking the RFK Jr. Kool-Aid still?
I don't know about the ones who are, like, high up in this movement who are, it's probably very fun to be so, like, close to such powerful people, and I think that can kind of skew people's vision and and what they do. I do know that there's a lot of people in the Maha movement who I think are becoming more disillusioned. Certainly not everyone, but I hear from them, who are, when they want a decrease in environmental toxins, and they see all of these environmental rollbacks, which are going to lead to more environmental toxins. I mean, that's not great. When they want, when they're skeptical of pesticides, and then they see the Republican Party voting for immunity for pesticide companies, they get a bit more skeptical. That's what I'm trying to do, is help people to understand if like their whole thing is reducing chronic disease and reducing chronic disease in our children. And the people who are most impacted by chronic disease overwhelmingly are low income people. And when you're taking away the public health resources that they need, to have better health outcomes like SNAP, like Medicaid, I mean, you're not going to be improving health outcomes in this country. You're just not. And so, that's what I'm trying to help people to understand. If we all want to decrease chronic disease rates, this is not the way to do it.
Absolutely. That's a good way to end it. And I just want to mention that people can go to FeedingAmerica.org, if they want to. And as Jessica said, the cash donations are really helpful. But I love the idea of looking at your own community and your neighbors and a Facebook page or something that could just help people neighbor to neighbor is a really nice thing to think about if you can do that in your hometown or whatever, wherever you
Yeah,
are.
I think schools and churches too are starting to, like, rally.
That's great. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Jessica, great to see you as always. Thanks, everyone. And we just wanted to make sure we were covering this story properly, and giving you all the right information about what is happening to, as we mentioned, 42 million Americans who rely on SNAP benefits. Jessica, good to see you. And thank you all for watching.
Thanks for giving attention to this, Katie. Means a
You're
lot.
welcome. Okay. Bye, Jessica. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.